The Long Island Railroad. It's the nation's busiest commuter train, with some 90 million people riding along its tracks yearly. But despite record ridership, critics say the LIRR must evolve if it wants to keep its customers safe. For instance, on February 26th, a crash left 3 people dead when 2 trains traveling in opposite directions struck a car that was trying to beat the crossing gate. In its wake, U.S. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer has called for a federal investigation into the LIRR's crash prevention technology. A lot of questions and a lot of uneasy commuters who are not really feeling safe these days on the train. So are their fears founded? Joining us with insight, Newsday transit reporter Alfonso Castillo. Alfonso, nice to have you with us.
Hi, Jack. How are you?
Good. I outlined some of the issues that folks who ride the LIRR are concerned about. And I know there was a hearing just very recently. Can you tell us a little bit about that hearing? First of all, what was the purpose behind it and who was participating?
The hearing was held by the New York Senate, the Democratic majority, and it predated this most recent tragedy in Westbury. It had more to do with a lot of the service problems that the Long Island Railroads had in the last couple of years. Last year was their worst on-time performance since 1999, and just beating the year before, which was the worst since 1999. So it's been a really rough stretch, and in just a couple days before that hearing, we had the tragedy in Westbury, and it became obviously another hot topic to talk about there at the hearing.
Let's talk about the service. We'll get to safety, but let's talk about service. And is it indeed declining as precipitously as we seem to hear?
It certainly was. I think there's a question now whether some of the improvements that have been put in place over the last year are starting to take hold. So just in the last few months, I think things have leveled out somewhat. But 2017 was a really rough year. I think a lot of that had to do with the issues at Penn Station, a lot of old infrastructure falling apart, and Amtrak, which owns Penn Station, has addressed a lot of that. Last year, it was really problems with the Long Island Railroad itself. We saw delays at Penn Station go down quite a bit, and yet delays overall grew. And I think there are a lot of issues at play. Some of it's weather, some of it is the age of the Long Island Railroad and its infrastructure. You're talking about a system that is close to 200 years old. So they brought in a new president just about a year ago. It was April of last year, and he certainly had a lot of big ideas on how to turn things around. And I think they'd say that, again, some of that is starting to take hold. December and January, which are typically pretty difficult months for the Long Island Railroad, in part because of weather, and they benefited somewhat from it being kind of a mild winter, but they were significantly better, not just than last year, but in several years. So I think there are some signs that things are starting to turn around. It remains to be seen whether they can hold on to this improvement.
Let me talk about this accident for a moment, because as you said, the meeting was scheduled before the accident. And when you look at the details, an absolute tragedy, but an easily preventable tragedy. 3 people in a car, and there's some stories about why they were running, but trying to beat the trains. The guardrails had come down. So I don't know that that's necessarily a situation that we can use as a springboard to talk about safety on the LIRR. So let's put that aside for a moment. What are some of the issues that you're seeing and that people are talking about with regard to safety on the LIRR?
Yeah, the issue with grade crossings is really complicated because on one hand, I mean, what you hear a lot is if you just stay out of the way of a train, you're not going to get hit by a train, right? So the train's not going to come off the tracks and come at you. And something I've heard over my years covering the beat is the fact that the railroad was actually there before the roads were. You know, again, the Long Island Railroad goes back 185 years before much of Long Island was even developed. So if the gates come down, there's plenty of warning. If you just abide by the regulations and the safety devices that they have in place, you should be fine. That said, there's a lot of them. There's close to 300 grade crossings around Long Island. Traffic builds up at them. People get impatient. Sometimes, one issue that came up a lot over the last couple of years is technology in some ways actually worsening the situation because people misunderstood their GPS on their phone and accidentally drove onto the tracks thinking it's where they were supposed to make a turn. So certainly in the last couple of weeks, a lot of the feedback I've gotten is, well, these are just people who aren't paying attention, that kind of thing. But I think it is a little more complicated than that. There are a lot of reasons why folks do sometimes find themselves in these positions of danger. And there are engineering solutions that at least could address the problem. I think the Long Island Railroad has done some of that, and there are other ideas that are out there. One that's I think gotten a lot of momentum since the accident is essentially red light cameras at grade crossings. You know, we've seen them be effective in reducing incidents of people driving through red lights at intersections. I think the thought is if folks knew that if they drove through a grade crossing when the gate was coming down, if they knew they were going to get a ticket, that would serve as a deterrent.
I'm sure if you ask the folks at the LIRR, they'd say they don't need any more bad publicity, and yet they were subjected to some fairly recently with regard to the mandated crash prevention technology. And it appears as if there were these antennae that were supposed to be part of this system and just were not functioning. Didn't do what they were supposed to do. Yeah, give us a quick capsulization of what that story was and what's being done to remedy that.
Yeah, this was actually, I think, the day before this accident. And it's worth pointing out that the system that you're talking about is called Positive Train Control. And it's a federal mandate that's been in place for almost 10 years for railroads to install this technology on their trains and their tracks. Basically, trains communicate with tracks. And if a train violates a signal, goes too fast, it'll slow down or stop the train. It's worth noting that would not have made a difference in the accident in Westbury, where the car just really at the last moment, came in the way of these two trains. Just a couple weeks ago, news came out about their latest setback, and it's pretty significant, as you touched on. One of the real critical parts of this technology are these antennae that go under the trains. They communicate with these radio transponders on the side of tracks. And 4,000 of these were installed on trains at the Long Island Railroad and Metro North. And basically, they all have to come off now and be reinstalled because there was an issue in how they were calibrated. It seems to be a real significant setback. There are not a lot of details about how much it'll set them back. And the fact is, it's not the only setback. So even if this was the only problem, that might be one thing. But there's a number of issues that have really plagued this project. And, at one point, 2020, it looked like a comfortable, safe date for them to hit. And I think there's a lot of concern now among the MTA, how much work it'll take to make 2020.
Well, Alfonso Castillo from Newsday. Alfonso, we always appreciate you helping us understand, because there are a lot of issues out there and a lot of movement taking place. So our thanks to you, and we'll look forward to talking with you again as we continue taking a look at the LIRR. You be well.
Great. Thanks for having me.